in rugby, a contact collision sport which has come a long way since it turned professional in 1995, is about understanding certain injury risks better. Concussions and second impact syndrome, as well as traumatic head, neck and spinal cord injuries, have been top of mind because dying for the game is not something those involved want to be taken literally. A number of incidents have been sad reminders of just how seriously the risks need to be taken at all levels and by all involved in the game. There is a responsibility for those at the very top.
I think, World Rugby and South African Rugby is doing a lot around head injuries. We're putting a lot of preventative stuff when it comes to head injuries. And players themselves, when you get an injury, you must also not want to go back on the field. Coaches need to know that you cannot put the player back, and similarly, the medical team. So head injury is a concern for us. We want to make sure that players who enter the field, play on the field is in a safe environment. And I don't want to talk about the school incident because that is outside our ambit. Of course, schools fall under the education department. And we need to make sure that the people facilitating those things are qualified and are members of South African Rugby Union.
Schoolboy and amateur rugby need to take responsibility for themselves and use the resources available. Professor Ross Tucker, part of World Rugby Independent Concussion Working Group, explains the risks for younger players.
So the young developing brain is definitely thought to be more susceptible to concussion. So a child playing a sport that involves head impact is more at risk from the same impact causing a concussion than an adult. And so for that reason, we have to be particularly mindful of taking steps to prevent concussions in children. I don't necessarily know that there are differences in the outcomes of that concussion other than the fact that they're more susceptible. The one thing that we are positive about in respects to rugby is that the evidence that does exist shows that they are extremely uncommon in kids playing rugby. If you look at what's called the risk or the number, the incidence of concussion, it goes up and then reaches a plateau once you reach adulthood. And so from the ages of about 13 and younger, the risk of a concussion is quite low because they play quite a different form of rugby. It's nothing like what we see when we watch the Springboks play Wales or New Zealand or England. So we're, I guess, to some extent encouraged by the fact that the chances of it happening playing sports are relatively low, similar in rugby as in many other sports. But of course, if there are, as I say, things that can be done to prevent them, we must do them. And then very importantly is that when parents, coaches, teachers, even teammates, when you see a player who has experienced or suffered a potential concussion, there's no point taking any risk at all. That has to be a case of recognize the symptoms, remove the player, and prevent any further exposure. So we have to be very conservative, and I think that's the message that has to go out. And it has to be strongest when you start talking about schoolboys and schoolgirls who are playing the sport.
The risk of concussion at the junior, at the lower age group level is extremely low. It's way lower than the elite level. One thing I must stress and emphasize though is that it still potentially could happen, and the way to avoid that is prevention, and the way to do that is correct preparation of these kids. And technique training is essential. Tackle technique training, entry in the ruck training, all these techniques where the head potentially could be knocked need to be addressed and coached properly, because that is the one way we'll go around avoid getting bangs to the head, which can make the game even safer for the youngster to play.
Just because we do have accidents in sport doesn't mean we should write off sports. We have accidents everywhere. We have accidents at home. You'll die in your bed, in your sleep. But that doesn't mean you won't sleep. You still drive a car, you still do all these other things. People still work, they still go to the roofs, they still ride scaffolds because we have to live.
Basically, to heal from concussion, you just have to not be on the screens, like not watch too much TV, or be on your phone the whole time, and try not to drink at all.
Obviously there's HIA, which is a head injury assessment. So you go for a head injury assessment on the spot with the medics on standby, and then after that we take it a recovery for maybe 2 weeks. So you don't play any rugby, you don't run, you don't drink any alcohol, and yeah, you just take it easy until you do another HIA at practice, the practice before the game, your next game.
Didn't play for I think 3 weeks after that, precautionary, but yeah, technically didn't run, didn't do nothing for about a week and a half, but didn't play for 3 weeks.
I would argue that it's important to take time off after any knock to the head. If you have taken a bang to the head and you have been diagnosed with a suspected concussion or confirmed concussion, it's important to take time off to allow that brain to recover. It's very interesting. An injury to the brain, a concussion, is not a structural injury. So you can't go and then do an MRI scan and a CT scan. It can't tell you how damaged the brain is. It affects the functional components of the brain, and those can't be seen. So we need time for the brain to actually heal.
I mean, this concussion issue is so complex. There are so many questions to which there are no conclusive answers, and this is one of them. Even to go back a step and define a concussion used to be thought of as a transient or temporary change in brain function caused by the impact to the head and the movement of the brain inside the skull. It's now questioned whether it's transient. Obviously, sometimes it is. Sometimes the effects of that concussion may persist for slightly longer. With respect to children, we know that they are more susceptible to concussion because the brain isn't developed yet, the skull isn't quite as thick, and so that combination means that potentially the same impact or the same forces could cause a concussion in children that wouldn't happen in adults. Whether or not the recovery from those is the same or not is unknown, and so there's much work to be done. I don't think ultimately it makes too much of a difference to the approach, which is still that you prioritize prevention.
A lot of parents confront me because they are complaining that they want their children to stop playing sport because sport is so dangerous, because they are always coming to my rooms, especially rugby. Maybe to a certain extent football, but usually the common injuries in football are lower level. Rugby is head, like I told you. And they all want their children to stop playing rugby because they are tired of coming to my rooms. And I tell them that if you are a parent and you have children, you always come to my rooms. If you are a parent of a boy and you don't want to come to my rooms because you don't want your child to get rugby injuries, you'll come to my rooms because they are on Nyaupe. And if you are a mother of a girl and you don't want to come to my rooms because you are tired of sport-related injuries or rugby injuries, you'll come to my rooms because she's pregnant and she's having an unwanted teenage pregnancy. So you'll always come to my rooms. So we have to sit down and say which is the better of the two, which one confers better advantages for the risks involved. You should remember, in life there'll always be risks.
The sport has not stood still in dealing with the risk, and the BoxSmart program has come a long way.
Now, prior to 2008, when we started developing this capacity, there was a spate of catastrophic head, neck and spine injuries around the country for the first 3 years, 2006, 2007, I think it was. And with that, there was a decision made to do something about it to try and lower this risk involved, and the BoxSmart program came about. Now, we spent the first 2 years, 2008, 2009, looking at what type of intervention, what strategy, what approach would work best to have an impact. And then we launched the BoxSmart program on the 2nd of July 2009. Since then, we have had 6 cycles of education around the country, targeting predominantly at coaches and referees, because that's where the work happens on the rugby field. That's where players are exposed to potential injuries, and the controlling people who have the most impact on them are the coaches and the referees. The coaches obviously during the preparation in the week spend a lot of time preparing and developing and conditioning their players and making them game ready for the Saturdays or whichever match days they have, and then the referees who control how the matches play out on those match days. So in order to get to the players, the strategy which shows the most evidence is to get to those people who control how the players function on the field, and that's the coaches and referees. So that's our main vehicle, is educating coaches and referees around the different elements and risks to the game, and then putting strategies in play to try and intervene.
Whether at the professional, amateur or school level, vigilance is key.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty clear understanding that we have in the game. If there is an incident like that the game needs to be stopped immediately. World Rugby has been clamping down on head injuries, so it's priority number 1 for them. So from our side, we thought it was going to be an immediate stop. And, as the sequence progressed, just after the incident happened, basically they got the ball back and he kind of stumbled. They nearly ran over him again. We intercepted the ball and nearly scored a try, and they came back to the other side, and he was involved in two more chances in the game where he tried to make a tackle, but you could see he was disorientated throughout the whole process. So from our side, it's pretty clear and obvious from World Rugby's perspective that the game needs to be stopped as soon as something like that happens.
Definitely. Roscoe is fine, first and foremost. He's fine. He took 3 weeks off after that bump, and I think he's more, how can I say, he's recovered well. And to be honest with you, we all know rugby is a contact sport. We can't do anything about some of the incidents. You can handle it, but some of the incidents, like the one of Roscoe, that was just, his head was just in the wrong position and he got bumped. But otherwise than that, I don't think you can change the game. You can save players. It's just about protecting yourself, especially you as a player, to look after your body, to look after your health, and on the field, try to tackle correctly and don't get on the wrong side of the guy who's running into you.
Yeah, look, I think the rules are there for a reason, and they're there to protect all of us as players. So, what counts for one of us has to count for everyone. So, yeah, I definitely think that the rules are there in place to protect us and be there for player welfare. But I don't think it's going to play a massive difference. We train how to level chains and how to tackle people below the waist height. So we know if you go anything above the shoulders, you're going to be in trouble. So yeah, I think the laws are there to protect us.
If a player is concussed, a player should be removed from the field of play. The player will always want to play because that's why they are there. They came to play, not to be nursed. So it is up to us as healthcare providers to protect these people. The long-term sequelae of these concussions paralyzes or creates further disability along the line. And it is our duty as doctors and healthcare professionals to protect, especially the children. If you look at the stats, you'll realize that concussion happens predominantly in the school children and the adolescents and the young adults. So it's our duty to protect them. If a player is concussed, do not yield to the pressure of the coach. There's nothing wrong with them wanting the player to continue. That's why they are there. There's nothing wrong with the player wanting to continue. The player came in to play. But it is our responsibility to protect the players. Players that are concussed should be removed from the field of play.